Hi everybody, it's really good to be here. Thanks for coming. I'm Tim, I'm Head of Interaction Design here, and I've been working on the GOVUK design system for a couple of years now, but kind of working on patterns and components in general for longer than that, really. I want to give a quick shout out because there's a load of current and past team members from the GOVUK design system team here today. So hi to Ollie somewhere, and Ignacia, and Stephen, and Nick, and Rosie, and Debs, and Amy, but also to Caroline, who I can see over there. It's really good to see you all. Let's catch up later on. But I wanted to give a big shout out, especially to Rosie, our user researcher, and to Rox, who couldn't be here this evening. A lot of what I'm going to talk about in this talk is based on a lot of their good work, so thank you especially. And the thing that I wanted to talk about today is this thorny issue, which you may or may not have had to deal with yet. If you haven't yet, you will be soon having to deal with it, I can guarantee it. How do you measure the value of your design system? So anyone who's working on a design system, actually, who here is working on a design system? Kind of like a quarter, third, half, it keeps going up. Okay, so you may already be in this world. Anybody who's working on a design system probably has a deep conviction that what they're doing is worth it, otherwise why would we be kind of doing it in the first place? And if you asked us what the benefits of design systems are, I think we'd probably give fairly similar responses. It's going to be something along these lines. We believe that using design systems is good for teams because it makes them more productive, because they have out-of-the-box components and patterns that they can just reuse. They can onboard new team members much faster because they've got documented patterns and components and tools that those new team members can get started with. And then teams who are all using the same system can start to share their work much more easily. So it kind of reduces duplication of effort, encourages contribution and so on, collaboration. And then the services themselves get better, we think. So they tend to be easier to maintain because it's a single unified code base that is somebody else's responsibility. They are often more accessible because there's a centralized team who's doing the extra hard work to make things as more accessible than any individual service team could spend time on. They're obviously more consistent because lots of different teams are reusing the same components and styles and patterns. And we hope that they become more usable over time because all of the best practice that individual service teams are learning is being shared amongst the whole community of users. And they can even be faster. So the GOVUK Pay team migrated to the GOVUK design system last year, and because the code base is much more efficiently written, the page download times got 1 or 2 seconds faster on average. So lots of benefits that we are convinced that design systems bring to teams and to services and to departments and organizations. But sooner or later, someone's going to call your bluff and ask you to prove that. And then your response is probably going to be something like that. Mine certainly was initially. But it's fair enough, all big organizations want to know that the money they're spending is being put to good use, and government is no exception, and it shouldn't be. And we're coming up to the end of a financial year, so obviously GDS is thinking about this kind of stuff. We're putting together business cases for the next rollover year's worth of budget and so on. So we've been thinking a lot about this on the design system team, and so that's what I'm going to talk about. If you go and scour the internet, you're going to find lots of blog posts of people kind of admitting that this is a bit of an issue. It's basically like a measurement problem. Measuring the benefit of these things is difficult. And we think there are kind of 2 big questions which you end up asking yourself, and no easy way to answer them, really. So the first question is, who's using your thing? You need to know that. And the second question is, how are they actually benefiting? You need to know both of those things, really. And so I'm going to talk about each of these questions in turn and give examples of how on the GOVUK design system team we've tried to answer them, and then I'll show how we've turned those answers into an estimate for how much money we think we're saving government. But first, just in case, I'm going to give a very quick overview of the GOVUK design system, although Kelly gave a really good one earlier anyway, so I'll be extra quick. So this is the GOVUK design system. It's being used by hundreds of teams up and down the country, so it's worth kind of reiterating. GOVUK looks like a single big website, and that's intentional, but actually it's being delivered simultaneously by hundreds of teams all around the country, all working for different departments, all working basically independently of each other. And so our big challenge is how do we let them all work together at the pace that they need to, but all produce something that's consistent and kind of feels like a single user experience. So that's what the design system is intended to help with. And it's under the hood, it's kind of a suite of 3 different products. So you've got the design system itself, which is the website that has the guidance and the code that you can copy and paste, and the templates and so on. And that gives you the kind of the styles, the color palettes and the layouts and the headings and so on. But it also gives you kind of higher level design patterns. So common things that services need to build into their digital interfaces, like how to help users check their answers before they submit them if they're applying for something and so on. The second tool is the prototype kit. So that's a bit of software that designers can use to really quickly make working HTML prototypes of services so that they can take them into user research and quickly learn from them, and they can kind of figure out what to build before they actually commit to building it. And then the third tool, which kind of underpins both of those things in a way, is GOVUK front-end, and that's the front-end framework. It's kind of bootstrapped for government. So it's accessible and it's responsive. Everything in it has been tested against the web content accessibility guidelines, so that the individual components, we're confident they meet things like color contrast and so on. And that's important because that's now a requirement for all government services by this September, actually. So those are the 3 products, but that's not everything. There's so much more than that, really. So there is training. We deliver training maybe every month or 2, particularly in the prototype kit. Deb's the background there was instrumental in delivering that last year. We do support, so we've got 3 or 4 support channels on Slack, but also on GitHub and on Zendesk, and we answer about maybe 150 support tickets every month. We do a lot of kind of outreach and community work, so we run weekly Google Hangouts for people like Kelly and others who are building design resources in departments, but we also do bigger workshops maybe once or twice a year, and get users and contributors and people who are producing design resources together to kind of foster a sense of community and sharing. And we do all of that stuff to encourage adoption and collaboration, but especially contribution. And you're right, that is a theme of this evening, I think, that contribution is really important, but it's also really hard. It certainly doesn't happen on its own. And you need to put constant energy into that. And people like Ignacio, our service designer, and Amy, our content designer, and Debs and others did so much work in the first year to kind of not just to deliver that aspect of the service, but to design it in the first place. And I think we're all benefiting from that now. So this kind of stuff is often undervalued. So that's the design system, what it's for, who it's for, and so on. I'll go back to the first of those 2 questions, so who's using it? So I'm going to talk a bit now about how we've tried to figure out who's using the GOVUK design system. It turns out to be surprisingly hard to answer, and one of the reasons is it's not a transactional service. People aren't signed in when they're using it. You can't watch them go through and just count the numbers. And also, we don't have a single tech stack for government. It's not like there's a single platform and we can actually watch people using our components. Government is much more like an entire industry, and we're trying to watch individual organizations within that industry. Some of them are working in the public and some of them are not working in the public, so it's pretty difficult to watch what's going on. But we thought, okay, well, let's try just looking at the web traffic. That's the easiest thing we can do first. Let's look at the website and see who's going to the website. Maybe we can use that as a proxy for usage. So we looked at our Google Analytics, and that graph is kind of from launch, so mid-2018 until the end of last year. And it's a good graph because it shows that usage has grown. It's grown by about over 250% since we launched. So we get about, I think last October we had about 20,000 visitors, and that sounds great, but it's not obvious how visitors to the website actually relates to work done. People can visit the website for lots of reasons. They're not all doing work on government services, and conversely, people can do quite a lot of work using our tools without ever visiting the website. If they're using a local copy or if they're just working within the prototype kit, they won't necessarily have to keep revisiting the website. So it's not an obvious relationship. I mean, it shows growth, and that's good, but it doesn't really give us a sense of absolute usage. And anyway, as of last December, we no longer collect this data, so we decided to disable Google Analytics from the design system website, and that was because we didn't want to have to get consent from all of our users to use that stuff. And it was kind of frustrating at first, but overall I think it's been a really good thing. It's forced us to think really hard about what data we need and why we need it. And Nick in particular has done some amazing work to find other ways of capturing similar data, but in a much more anonymous way, in particular by looking at our server logs. And so he's been building dashboards like this to show the potential of that. So website traffic can show us general trends in growth, and that's good to know, but it doesn't really give us any information about absolute usage. So the second thing we try to look at is the actual code that teams are deploying. And the first place we looked for that was a place called NPM. So that's NPM stands for Node Package Manager, and that's the place where the GovUK front-end code gets packaged up and distributed so that teams around the country can easily reuse it. And every time a team deploys some of their code that uses our code, we get to hear about it on the NPM website, so we can track that happening. And so that's the graph of like usage installs of GovUK front end over time, again from the launch of the design system to very recently. The blue line is GovUK front end, and it's gone up to like 16,000 installs a day, I think that might be, is that a week? A week, sorry. And then the red line is our kind of previous products. For people who've worked in government before, we had a thing called GovUK Elements, which is like the previous version of this tool, and you can see that that's really tailed off there. And those two big troughs, that's Christmas, and that's Christmas as well. So that gives you a sense of what happens in government at Christmas. We all go home. So again, it's an upward trend by and large, and that's really good news. But it still doesn't really give us an accurate reflection of usage, because people can do strange things. They could set up their test environments to like install GovUK front end every hour or every minute or every day, and we just won't know if that's happening or not. So it's not that reliable in this information. So we looked at a third place, which is GitHub, which has already had a few mentions this evening. Loads and loads of government service teams are using GitHub. Not all of them, and that's important, but lots of them are. They're hosting their code on GitHub. GitHub has a really nice feature called the dependency graph, which is basically a place you can look and you can see all the other repos on GitHub that are using your repo. So we could see everybody on GitHub who's using GovUK front end, and you can see that there are 1,300 odd repos that are using GovUK front end, and then 49 other packages which are using our package, and then those packages are being used in other repos, but we don't know about those, so we had to kind of make an estimate. And again, Nick helped with a kind of very quick rule of thumb here, which was something along the lines of, you wouldn't build you wouldn't build a package unless you had at least 5 repos you wanted to put it in. So we used 5 as a very conservative estimate, and that bumps it up to about 1,500, which is kind of useful. It lets us know something, but we didn't really learn much more until we started to interrogate those repos. So we used a tool called OpenRefine, which used to be owned by Google, which lets you kind of take really messy data and tidy it up and interrogate it a bit more. And so we looked into, actually when we did the test in September, there were like 800 repos. We looked into them all and started to figure out which departments were they from, were they prototypes, was it live code, what services were there. So we were looking for service names and strings in the code, all of this stuff, and we tidied it all up. And we think we found about 300 distinct services amongst those 800 or so repos. So it's worth saying a single service is usually made out of multiple repos, and a single repo can appear in multiple services. So again, there's not an obvious connection. We had to actually manually go and look at all of those things to try and figure this out. But we got to a number, it's about 300. And actually that was one of the big important numbers that went into our business case at the end of the year. That's helped us with the economic model. But hopefully you're getting a picture that the problem with all of this stuff is that none of these metrics give complete coverage, and you don't know by how much you're missing. We don't know what proportion of government services aren't on GitHub. So they all under or overcount by an unpredictable amount. So we have to be very careful about what we infer from this stuff. So what we've tended to do, because we're trying to build a kind of business case, is to just be conservative in every estimate, go with a lower number. But the good news is all of those metrics are going up, so that gives us confidence that we're doing the right thing. So this is the second question we had, which is, okay, maybe we know a little bit about how many people are using the design system, but how are they benefiting? We're assuming there are productivity gains, but like by how much? That's really hard to answer, because you're basically asking people to compare their reality to a hypothetical scenario, which is like really dodgy user research territory. But it didn't stop us trying. Thank you, Rosie, for being patient with us. So Rosie did an amazing job, like at really short notice, to try and help us answer this question. And we interviewed 10 users from around government, from about 6 different departments, a mixture of designers and developers. And we asked them how they use our products and how those products help them in their jobs or not. And we got some really good qualitative stuff about how the products help them. For example, they don't have to relearn things when they join a new team. The code is easier to maintain. They can focus on the end-to-end service transformation rather than individual kind of components and patterns and buttons and so on. And that's kind of reiterated in the other 2 talks, I think, as well. And that they don't have to kind of spend a load of time making decisions. Just making decisions takes time, and like having to decide every tiny little thing is kind of exhausting, and it takes extra time from the team. And then every now and then people would try to give us an estimate of how much more productive they were using these tools. So we got kind of quotes like this, and this one, and this one. And it's worth saying that people were really quite reticent to stick their neck out and give us this kind of estimates. And like, you can imagine why. If you were asked this kind of a question, it's a really difficult one to answer because, I mean, people felt confident that they were definitely more productive, but they found it hard to say by how much. And I think that's because there is no simple relationship between these products and your productivity. It's very contextual. But we figured if we get enough estimates that we can take an average and again go with a lower figure, and that can help us with the business case. And we found some other things out as well. So we discovered that about half of our participants were using the GOVUK design system every day, and the rest were using it at least once a week. And that gave us the confidence we needed to assume that teams are getting continuous benefit from our products. It's not just like every now and then, or once a month or so on. It's like most weeks, every day. And on average, people were saying that they were perhaps 3 to 5 times more productive when they were using the tools than before they existed, or if they didn't have access to them. So, for example, one person said that they could probably make a 10-screen prototype in half a day instead of 2.5 days. Another person said that what would have taken them about 12 days before took them about 4 days. So that kind of stuff, right? Rough estimates and a small sample size, but it's giving you a sense of the scale of the productivity gains, which is what we needed. And so then we worked with some economists in GDS, in particular Parry, Roxy and myself and Barry and Rosie and others got together, and we kind of took all of this data, we figured out what was useful, and then we built it into an economic model. And an economic model sounds kind of glamorous maybe, but it looks like that. It's just a spreadsheet, although there were plenty of days where to me it looked a bit more like that. I'm definitely not a natural economist. It was a deeply uncomfortable space to be in. So the model itself, I'm not going to show all the details because it's kind of too small to fit on the screen, but it's based on these kinds of assumptions. So assumptions is about how many teams are currently using our tools, which we think is about 300 out of maybe about 700. How often people on those teams use our tools, so we think it's like half of them are using it every day, half of them are using it once a week. How much more productive teams are using our tools, so like 3 to 5 times. And then what would happen if those tools didn't exist, and that's a really hard thing. And so one thing we've tried to build into the model is to acknowledge that something would happen. Departments would probably step in and build their own design systems. I mean, we've seen that already happening, and that's partly because they need to, because we're not quite up to speed yet, and partly because it would probably happen anyway. There's no idealized scenario where there's one single tool which is meeting everybody's needs, I don't think. But what we could probably confidently say is that if we didn't exist, more of that would be happening, and the teams would need to be much bigger to support that work, because there'd be no centralized resource that the departmental design systems could use. And then finally, like kind of figures about average salaries and what's the cost of hiring a person on a digital service team in government, and what's the churn rate and so on. So we put all of that stuff together, and we did come up with a number. I'm not actually sure whether I'm supposed to show it, but I'm going to anyway. So this is the number. We think the GOVUK design system saves the government about or over £17 million a year. That's the low estimate. Maybe it's 19.5, maybe it's 17. I guess Ollie's made this point before. It's like we're trying to show that it saves enough money. That's kind of the important thing. Like, we're not trying to show the exact number in pounds and pence that it saves. It's like we're just trying to demonstrate that you get a good ROI off of this stuff. But I want to be clear that, so what this is saying is, this is how much more money we think government would need to spend in order to deliver services of a similar quality without the design system. So that's important. It's about delivering work of a similar quality. And the reason that is important is that I think probably we know that in reality, were that to happen, it wouldn't necessarily be the money that got spent, it would be the quality that suffered. So government probably wouldn't spend the additional money, it would let the services not be as good as they could be. And that's one of the problems, I think, with this whole approach, is it focuses mainly on the potential financial benefits to government expressed in pounds and pence. And it encourages us to view design systems as primarily an efficiency tool. And once you start doing this, I kind of worry a bit that if you express everything in terms of savings made or efficiencies gained, it's very hard to stop doing that. Once you start talking in that way, pretty soon all your conversations are going to be about efficiency and cost savings. And then sooner or later, someone's going to point to your team and say, does it really need to be that big? Because that's a great way of saving money. So I want to end with that reminder, really, which is that I think the main reason we're all doing this is not to make cheaper public services, but to make better ones. And that requires continuous investment, but I hope that I've shown that it's worth it. Thank you.